She swore she'd never make the same mistakes I did. I said nothing, leaning on the porch railing as the morning wind stirred the pines. Her laugh echoed off the siding, careless and sharp. I folded my hands around a cold coffee mug, letting the quiet sink in. Someday she'd see how easy it is to repeat history. Before I tell you how it all turned around, hit subscribe and let me know which state you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning fog lingered over Haversfield like it was holding its breath. I was on the front porch, rocking slowly, listening to the faint hum of my old Chevy's engine idling in the driveway. The smell of rain on wet asphalt mixed with the pine resin clinging to the air. Across the street, the corner diner's neon sign flickered orange, half drowned in mist. Life felt ordinary, until it wasn't. My daughter, Emily, leaned against the screen door, phone in hand, scrolling. I said nothing, just nodded at the newsprint I'd left on the table, a habit from decades of mornings. She didn't look up. Her boots tapped the wood floor, each tap like punctuation. "You know, Dad," she said finally, voice casual but edged with something sharper. "Maybe I'm better off doing things my way. You never really understood what it's like out here." I set the mug down, fingers grazing the rim, watching the steam curl in the cool air. I remembered teaching her to tie her shoes in that same kitchen, laughing at her frustrated little fists. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been growing, tucked under advice and borrowed money, under my patience, under years of assuming she'd learn. "Better off?" I asked quietly. "No heat, just observation?" The words floated between us, heavier than rain clouds. Her eyes darted to mine, a flicker of irritation. "Yeah, I don't need your lectures anymore. Honestly, maybe some things are better left alone. I've got it from here." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Silence became the language I chose. My hands, rough from decades of farm work and late nights in the shop, flexed around the mug. I could feel the story of my life, the sweat, the overtime, the loans I'd co-signed, the tuition I'd scraped together, pressing in. And I realized none of it mattered in her moment of independence. I went inside slowly, footsteps muted on the wooden floor. The house smelled faintly of last night's burnt toast, a scent that once made her laugh. I opened drawers, folded shirts into neat squares, and stuffed socks into the old suitcase in the corner. The zipper caught a little, stubborn as the past, but I coaxed it closed. Keys to the Chevy lay in my palm. Cold metal, familiar weight. I tested the ignition, felt the engine purr awake. I glanced at the photograph on the mantel. Emily at 8, dirt on her knees, grinning from a scraped-up scrape. I took it down, slipped it into the suitcase. A final, private acknowledgement that I hadn't forgotten, even if she already had. The door clicked shut behind me, soft but definitive. The mist hugged the porch, a shroud for the moment of departure. Tires crunched over wet gravel as I drove slowly, leaving behind the kitchen chatter and the faint, echoing laughter of a girl who thought she was finally free. I didn't look back. Not yet. The radio crackled with old country tunes, a song I'd heard 1,000 times, each note a reminder that life kept moving even when you wanted it to pause. I turned onto the main road, headlights slicing through the morning gray, fields of corn and the occasional scarecrow passing by in a blur. Her words, sharp and unfiltered, lingered. Better off doing things my way, and I knew she would stumble. She always did when she ignored the quiet lessons life had whispered. But that wasn't my fight, not yet. My fight was survival, dignity, and leaving with my hands clean, my conscience intact. The motel I'd reserved a town over waited, small and unassuming, buzzing faintly under neon lights. I pulled in, parking in the shadow of a sagging sign that read Haven Inn. Room 14 smelled of bleach and old carpet, but it was mine, in a sense no one could dispute. I unpacked slowly, clothes, papers, ledgers, a worn notebook where I'd kept every receipt, every loan, every sacrifice. Each item placed with deliberate care, like setting chess pieces before the game began. As I poured coffee from the tiny pot in the kitchenette, I allowed myself a moment to look out the window at the streetlights reflecting in puddles. Emily's house, my porch, the small town that had once held all my life, gone from my immediate sight, but not from memory. I sat at the table sipping the bitter brew, calm, measured, prepared, because that was the thing about betrayal. It wasn't just the breaking of trust. It was the mirror it held up to all the time, energy and love you'd poured in, and now for the first time in decades I had a choice. To react or to act, I chose action. Quiet, deliberate, lawful, unstoppable. The road stretched ahead, wet and glinting under neon reflections. I turned the keys in the ignition once more, feeling the vibrations through the steering wheel. The night wasn't forgiving, but it was honest, and for the first time I felt that honesty as a kind of freedom. But that was only the beginning. As I drove past the bank, the numbers came back before the pain did. I remembered the late nights I'd spent balancing loans, writing checks for tuition, paying off hospital bills when her knee had broken in high school soccer. I remembered her college tuition, the roof repairs after the hailstorm, every second mortgage I'd taken so she could have opportunities I never had. And she had promised. "I'll learn from your mistakes, Dad," she'd said, voice steady. I smiled faintly at the memory, thinking I had. But even then, I should have known. Emily had always carried my habits, sometimes beautifully, sometimes dangerously. The first mistake she repeated was financial recklessness. I'd lived months without sleep, working 2 jobs just to cover for unpaid bills and risky investments. She too borrowed from friends and lenders, promising repayment she had no plan for. The cycle was already familiar, and I'd seen it tear me down over decades. The second mistake was pride, refusing to ask for help. I'd swallowed my pride to keep the family afloat, silently carrying burdens rather than admit weakness. She in turn refused advice from her mentors, turned down reasonable counsel, and acted as though she could navigate everything alone, even while stepping into the same traps I had. And the third, trusting the wrong people. I'd once lent my name to business partners who vanished with money I'd saved for years. She repeated it, blindly believing the charm of a promising colleague, ignoring the subtle red flags I would have recognized in an instant. Each memory cut like winter wind against the windshield. I'd given her everything, and yet, like clockwork, she was walking the same roads I had, convinced she'd invented the wheel anew. I understood why parents felt frustration, but this was more than frustration. It was the quiet ache of watching history loop before your eyes. I didn't scold. I didn't plead. I just let the steering wheel vibrate under my hands as I reflected on the years of sacrifice and lessons ignored. Every dollar, every sleepless night, every cautionary word, it had built a foundation, but she was choosing to tear it down with her own hands. I thought I was building her future. Turns out I was building the scaffolding for a mistake she was determined to repeat. I stayed at the house had been mine longer than most things in my life. The porch where Emily learned to tie her shoes, the sagging kitchen table where bills were paid and birthdays were carved into the varnish. That night, instead of packing a suitcase for a motel, I slept in the spare room with the window cracked, the pine smell drifting in like an old friend. The boards creaked the same way. The house knew me. Morning came slow and clear. I made coffee in the same pot that had seen 3 generations through winter. The radio hummed low. Outside, the mailbox clattered with neighborly morning paper and mortgage notices I no longer ignored. I moved through the rooms like a man taking inventory of an estate he still owned in every right that mattered. I kept the photo of Emily on the mantel. I set it face up, not hidden in a suitcase. That picture reminded me who I was fighting for most, myself. Rebuilding started with small things. I cleared the junk from the garage. I found the old ledger I kept under the toolbox. Receipts, canceled checks, names and dates penciled in the margins. I smoothed the pages and read them like a map. Each entry reminded me what I'd given and where the cracks had started. I wrote new notes in the margins. Precise words, dates, names, evidence doesn't tremble with feeling. It sits steady on paper. I made the house useful again. I hung a dry erase on the pantry door and listed phone numbers. Bank, lawyer, the county clerk, a retired accountant I'd worked with years ago. I called the accountant first. Short sentences. I need help verifying some transactions. He said he'd come by on Thursday. He didn't ask why. Men who have seen storms recognize the quiet before them. There was method to what I planned. This time, revenge wouldn't be a dramatic departure or a shouted confrontation. It would be austerely domestic and quietly public. I would not run from the house I'd built. I would use it. The porch would be where neighbors could pass me notes. The kitchen where papers would be sorted into folders with tabs. My dignity. I went through drawers, found deeds and the title papers. I made copies, notarized ones when necessary, and slid them into manila folders. A folder labeled Accounts sat beside another labeled Witnesses. I left the TV off. Silence is a better amplifier than anger. At dusk, I walked down Main Street. Folks nodded. I kept my face calm. No announcement. No begging for attention. I was simply visible, a steady man on his porch, not a man running from his life. That visibility breeds its own kind of power. It invites questions. It collects whispers. It assembles witnesses. The night before I started, I laid out the tools on the kitchen table, my laptop, the ledger, a legal pad, my old fountain pen, and the photograph of Emily. I folded my hands around the pen like a promise. I would not take a motel route to justice. I would make the home I had given a site of accountability. Tomorrow would be the first real step. I started early. The first call was to the bank, my voice steady, precise. I need to verify all accounts under my name and any co-signed loans with Emily, I said, letting each word hang in the morning air. Paperwork rustled on the kitchen table as I jotted down names, confirmation numbers, and timestamps. Every fact anchored me, every detail a small reclamation of what had been quietly slipping away. Next, I called the county clerk. I asked about property liens, trust documents, and whether any changes had been filed without my knowledge. The clerk responded with measured professionalism, unaware of the emotional weight behind my questions. I listened carefully, repeated numbers, noted case files. Each phone call felt like flipping a switch. Control returned inch by inch. Insurance came next. Auto and home policies needed verification. I spoke to representatives in calm, even tones, correcting addresses, confirming beneficiaries. Nothing was left unrecorded. My ledger grew heavier with each detail, not in guilt or anger, but in precision. I felt the house settle around me, boards creaking in quiet approval. I was home, and home had power. By mid-morning, I'd verified accounts, documented loans, and confirmed titles. The folders on the kitchen table multiplied. One for witnesses, one for transactions, one for financial institutions. Each folder was a shield, each signature a step toward quiet justice. The photograph of Emily rested beside them, a reminder of the personal cost behind the paper. I reviewed the documents again. Every debt sheet accumulated, every unauthorized transaction, logged. I called my old accountant, who agreed to examine the ledgers and verify the discrepancies. No anger, no confrontation, only exactitude. He promised notarized summaries, turning my home into a quiet command center. Evening fell. The kitchen was warm, the coffee cooling in its mug. The legal steps were documented. Each phone call, each signature, each verified fact became a brick in the foundation of accountability. I sat back in the chair by the window, watching the streetlights reflect in puddles left by the afternoon rain. Step by step, account by account, I was reclaiming everything that had been taken, not through anger, but through precision. The house, my home, held me like it always had. And for the first time in years, I felt that justice, measured and quiet, was already beginning to take shape. Tomorrow, the work would continue, but tonight the calm was enough. I had turned silence into a weapon, and the walls of my own house would witness it all. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards settling. I sat at the kitchen table, folders stacked neatly before me, the coffee long since cooled but still heavy with the morning's intent. Each verified account, each notarized document, each careful phone call felt like a stone laid in the foundation of something larger than anger. Control regained. I watched the street through the window. A couple walked their dog past the mailbox. She laughed, a light, careless sound. It was ordinary life moving on. Indifferent to the battles I fought quietly inside these walls. Yet even in its simplicity, it reminded me of what had been lost. The trust, the care, the sense of being heard. I checked the folders one last time, making sure each note was clear, each signature verified. Emily's repeated mistakes, borrowing recklessly, trusting the wrong people, ignoring advice, and all mapped in ink. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt preparation, peace without confrontation, justice without spectacle. Outside, the wind stirred the pines, carrying the scent of rain and earth. I breathed it in, steadying myself. The calm was deceptive, fragile, the quiet before the reckoning. Soon she would feel the consequences of her actions, not shouted at her, not forced, but inevitable, lawful, and undeniable. Before silence became the only language left between me and what used to be called home, I allowed myself a small smile. The work had begun, and for once I wasn't running from it. I was ready. By mid-morning the calls began. Emily's phone rang first at the house, a persistent trill that cut through the quiet like a warning bell. I didn't answer. Then came texts, short and sharp, each more urgent than the last. "Dad, we need to talk." "I didn't know." I folded them neatly into the ledger I'd set aside for documentation. Nothing escaped the folders now. When the doorbell rang, I looked out the window before answering. She stood there, shoulders tight, eyes wide, and the familiar curve of her smile missing. The house smelled of coffee and pine. The soft creak of the porch under my boots was the only sound as I opened the door. "Emily," I said quietly. "Come in. No lecture. No scolding. Just space, and the authority that came from years of measured choices." Inside, the kitchen smelled like yesterday's rain and the bread I'd baked that morning. She shifted from one foot to the other. Dad, I didn't mean—" I gestured to the table. The folders were waiting, neatly labeled. Accounts, loans, witnesses, notes. I placed my hands on the top folder. "I think it's time you saw what repeating my mistakes looks like." Her gaze dropped to the papers. The numbers stared back, factual, unyielding. Unpaid loans, co-signed debts, unauthorized transfers. Every choice I had warned her about, every lesson ignored, now arranged in precise order. "I thought I was careful," she whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't—" "Careful isn't enough when you ignore the warning signs," I said softly. No anger, only clarity. You borrowed recklessly, trusted the wrong people, refused advice. The same mistakes I made decades ago. And now the consequences are here, as predictable as sunrise. She looked up, tears welling. "I didn't think it would hurt this much," she admitted. "I didn't make this to hurt you," I said, pulling a chair out and sitting. "I made this so you could understand responsibility, so you could see, without me standing over you, what your choices cost." She sank into the chair opposite me. The silence stretched, heavy but instructive. I pointed to the ledger. Every number, every account, every document, and all verified. The law, the bank, witnesses. Nothing is conjecture. Nothing is emotion. Just fact. Her hands trembled. I watched the subtle shifts in her expression. Shame, recognition, the quiet dawning of comprehension. I see it now," she said, voice barely above the hum of the refrigerator. "You needed to," I said. "Not so I could punish, not so I could scold. You needed to see that choices have weight, that consequences aren't selective." She swallowed hard. Dad, You repeated my mistakes," I interrupted gently. "You didn't invent them, but you can choose not to repeat the rest. That's the difference between a life trapped in cycles and a life lived deliberately." I leaned back, letting the window light catch the lines in her face, the realization settling like dust on the floorboards. She saw not a parent enraged, but a man quietly steady, holding accountability like a shield rather than a weapon. Finally, she nodded. "I understand. I can't undo it, but I can change from here." I stood, walking past her to the doorway. The wind rustled the pines outside. "Then start there," I said. "Start with the facts and let them guide you, not excuses or pride." She rose, hesitant but determined. "I will, Dad. I swear I will." I opened the door, letting her step into the crisp morning. She paused, glancing back once. I didn't call her back. I let the moment breathe. The ledger stayed on the table, folders stacked neatly, evidence of accountability, of careful, lawful action. I closed the window and turned to the kitchen. The house was quiet again, but different. Steadier, stronger, a witness to the first true step of understanding. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at the table. Outside, the street stretched empty and clean. For the first time, the reckoning had a shape, one defined by facts, by law, and by deliberate calm. I didn't know how long it would take for her to truly learn, but the first step had been taken. And for now, that was. The next morning, the house felt heavier, but in a purposeful way. The ledger lay open on the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside it. I had spent the night reviewing every number, every note, and yet a quiet sense told me there was more to uncover. Emily's repeated mistakes weren't only careless, they were deliberate shortcuts and omissions. Hints of financial shortcuts that I hadn't anticipated. I walked to the mailbox and found a letter from the county clerk. Nothing alarming at first glance. But as I read, my stomach tightened. Some of the property documents, the accounts she had access to, had subtle alterations. Dates shifted, signatures blurred, transactions unaccounted for. A deeper pattern emerged, one that hinted at reckless, maybe even unlawful maneuvering. I called my old accountant. Short sentences, no emotion. I need you to verify all transactions under Emily's name tied to my accounts and properties. Check for discrepancies and any signs of misrepresentation. He agreed without hesitation. He knew me well enough to trust that this wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Later, I visited the bank in town. I spoke to a manager I had known for decades. I need a full audit on my accounts. Any unusual withdrawals, loans, co-signed checks under her name. I handed over notarized statements, past ledgers, everything I had. The manager nodded, impressed with the methodical documentation. We'll begin immediately, he said. The pieces started to fit. The mistakes Emily repeated were more than echoes of my past. They were patterns that allowed others to take advantage of her trust. She had been unknowingly complicit in overdrafts, unverified loans, and deferred payments. The outburst she had shown in the kitchen yesterday wasn't ignorance. It was fear of losing control. I returned home and spread the documents across the kitchen table. Ledgers, receipts, bank statements, notarized copies, all arranged neatly. Each discrepancy was noted, each date verified. Evidence didn't demand attention. It commanded it quietly. The house seemed to lean in closer, listening. I called a retired detective, a friend who had once investigated corporate fraud in another life. I'm not reporting yet, I said. I need verification first, but I may need your expertise soon. Emily's errors may have exposed legal vulnerabilities. He agreed to meet and review everything quietly, without fanfare. By evening, I had a clear picture. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about precision. Every document, every verified number, every witness I could call upon would become part of a lawful, undeniable record. Tomorrow I would begin organizing it for action. Not for revenge, but for accountability. I stood by the window watching the street settle into quiet. Neighbors moved through their routines, unaware that a careful reckoning was quietly assembling under the roof they had always known as mine. I felt no bitterness, only determination. Tomorrow I'd walk in with evidence, not emotion. The mistakes she repeated had revealed themselves fully, and now I would ensure that justice, measured and undeniable, followed. The next morning, the kitchen table was covered in order. Ledgers, receipts, notarized copies, bank statements, and printed emails lay in neat stacks. Each document represented a step toward control, each number a silent assertion that I would not be manipulated again. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, the steam curling into the morning sunlight, and began. First, the bank. I returned, this time with every ledger, every transaction highlighted, every signature verified. I spoke calmly to the branch manager. I need these accounts frozen until all discrepancies are reviewed. Any co-signed loans under my name, any transfers made without my approval, I want them documented, and I need confirmation in writing. The manager nodded, flipping through the papers with a precise eye. Absolutely, Mr. Lawson, everything will be logged. You'll receive copies of all verifications. His voice was professional, detached, unaware of the emotional weight behind my meticulous calm. I noted each confirmation number, each timestamp, filing them immediately in a folder labeled Bank Actions. Next came the county clerk's office. I requested full public records of property ownership, transfers, and liens. Every document I had already gathered was cross-checked. I asked about any filings Emily might have made without my knowledge. The clerk, a young woman with glasses sliding down her nose, typed methodically, checking each name against the system. I didn't flinch when she asked why. Facts were enough. Explanations weren't needed yet. Back at home, I called my old accountant. All discrepancies confirmed? I asked, voice quiet but firm. Yes, he said, and there are a few more unauthorized entries you didn't catch yesterday. I'll notarize and summarize them for you. I wrote down the call time, date, and promise of delivery. Next, I reached out to a retired detective, someone I trusted from years past. I explained what I had uncovered. Loans Emily hadn't fully understood, signatures she didn't realize she had authorized, accounts in jeopardy. He agreed to review the documents, offering practical advice on how to protect myself and how to document everything legally, thoroughly, immutably. I then contacted creditors and collectors, one by one. My tone was calm, professional, precise. Mr. Lawson speaking. Please update your records. I am the sole responsible party on these accounts. Any collection calls for Miss Emily Lawson should be redirected to her directly. Confirm receipt and update your files. Names, reference numbers, dates, confirmations, all noted. No emotion, no argument. Every recorded acknowledgement was a brick in the wall of accountability I was building. I repeated the process with 5 different institutions before lunch. By afternoon, the ledger had grown heavier. Every verified discrepancy was logged, every witness recorded. Bank officers, clerks, accountants. I created a timeline of Emily's repeated mistakes and the consequences of her actions. Nothing was left to memory. Everything had proof. The final step for the day was social verification. Small towns run on observation and gossip, often more reliable than the press. I called Mrs. Cranston at the diner, she knew everyone's business, and asked her discreetly to confirm dates of known financial transactions, unusual visits to the bank, and other minor details. She agreed, amused but understanding the gravity. I noted her statements, again without commentary. As evening fell, the house felt calm, purposeful. The wind stirred the pines outside, carrying the smell of damp earth and the last of the day's sun. I sat at the kitchen table reviewing all folders, bank actions, county records, creditors, witness statements, accounting discrepancies. Everything aligned, every fact verified. My coffee was cold, but I didn't care. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the quiet authority of preparation settle in. Justice had begun not through confrontation, not through anger, but through methodical, lawful action. The next steps would be executed carefully in order, ensuring that Emily would see the full measure of responsibility, the weight of her repeated mistakes, and the certainty that the law, combined with meticulous documentation, would protect the innocent and correct errors without spectacle. By nightfall, I closed the ledger, stacking the folders neatly. The house was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Outside, the street was empty, lined with softly glowing porch lights. I looked at the folders, at the careful outline of evidence and verification, and felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time in months, I was no longer reacting. I was orchestrating a controlled, lawful response rooted in clarity, precision, and undeniable fact. In towns like Haversfield, truth travels faster than rumor, and it doesn't stop. By the time Sunday service ended, justice had already started whispering my name, and I would ensure that when it spoke clearly without doubt. The next morning, the town of Haversfield was quiet, with only the distant hum of a grain truck on Main Street. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, observing the familiar patterns. Neighbors walking dogs, Mrs. Cranston unlocking the diner, children biking to school. The world went on, unaware that a quiet reckoning was unfolding under the surface of everyday life. By mid-morning, word had started to circulate. Emily, desperate to regain control, had begun her own narrative. Gossip traveled faster than she anticipated, Dad's being unreasonable. She's in over her head. In small towns, whispers at the hardware store or behind the church steps carry more weight than any social media post. I didn't respond publicly. I documented everything instead, jotting down times, places, names, snippets of overheard conversations. Facts, not emotion, would be my defense. I walked through the diner later, nodding quietly at familiar faces. Conversations halted mid-sentence, a glance of recognition here, a raised eyebrow there. Small towns don't need newspapers, they have coffee counters. I overheard, he's calm about it, but he's organized. Everything in order. That was the point. Calm, deliberate, undeniable. Emily's counter-narrative escalated. Her texts and calls became more personal, attacking my judgment, my age, my temperament. You don't understand me anymore. You're punishing me for being human. She even contacted a lawyer briefly, trying to insinuate neglect, trying to claim elder abuse. I documented every call, every message, timestamps and content, noting the stark contrast between accusation and fact. Then came the emotional ambush. Late that night, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Emily standing there, her eyes wide, voice trembling. Dad, I can't fix this on my own. I need you, please. She clutched a small box inside which were letters, receipts, even a photograph of us at the lake years ago. Intimate leverage meant to stir guilt, manipulate my empathy. For a moment, the father in me stirred. The man who had nurtured her, sacrificed for her, wanted to reach out, But the man who had meticulously documented every error, every discrepancy, every potential legal vulnerability, did not. For a moment I considered the warmth of the past. Then I remembered the ledger on the kitchen table, the banks contacted, the notarized copies, the witnesses ready. "I hear you, Emily," I said, voice steady, measured. "I understand the fear, the regret, but I cannot reverse the facts. They stand on their own, and neither guilt nor pleading changes them." Her voice cracked. "But Dad—" I held up a hand. "This isn't punishment. It's accountability. Every action has a consequence. Every choice has a record. You wanted to play with numbers, with decisions. Now the numbers are clear, and the consequences are accounted for. Step back, observe, learn." She sank into the porch step, shaking, realizing that manipulation would get her nowhere. I didn't speak again. I quietly closed the door, leaving her with the weight of truth, the clarity of law, and the stark reality of her repeated mistakes. The next day, I documented the ambush, time, date, exact words, witnesses, including the neighbor who had seen her pacing in the yard. Everything became part of the factual ledger, reinforcing the narrative with unshakable precision. Pen on paper replaced shouting. Time-stamped notes replaced arguments. Each line of documentation restored order where chaos had threatened. Over the next week, the town absorbed the truth quietly. Mrs. Cranston at the diner confirmed details to neighbors. The bank had verified all irregularities. Creditors had updated their records. Gossip lost force against concrete evidence. Rumors fizzled under the weight of documented truth. Emily's repeated attempts at manipulation faltered. She tried text messages, phone calls, even informal confrontations in the grocery store. But each effort was silently countered with precise records. Each failure of influence reinforced the lesson. Calm preparation outlasts emotional outbursts. I continued my routine. Coffee, ledger review, small tasks around the house. The rhythm of daily life became a shield. Outside, the morning sun glinted off wet streets after a brief rain. Dust settled and the town moved on, just as I intended. My presence remained quiet, authoritative, methodical. By the end of the week, the emotional ambushes ceased. Emily's recognition of the ledger, the verified facts, and the calm authority of lawful preparation had stripped her attempts of power. Small-town justice paired with procedural integrity had reasserted itself. She no longer tried to manipulate, to persuade, or to twist facts. I sat on the porch reviewing my notes. Every call, every visitor, every transaction accounted for. Each recorded detail reinforced not only the accountability of Emily's repeated mistakes, but also the integrity of the methodical approach I had employed. The ledger remained on the kitchen table, a silent testament to order, precision, and the power of preparation over chaos. In the end, the town decided who was accountable. The facts, quietly verified and methodically documented, spoke louder than any plea or accusation, and I did not need to intervene. My calm strength, rooted in law and procedure, had ensured that responsibility and truth prevailed. The following morning, the sun was sharp against the brick of Haversfield's town square. I parked my old truck a block away, the engine ticking as it cooled, and walked toward the courthouse steps, ledger tucked under my arm. Emily was already there, surrounded by a small crowd, attempting to rally sympathy with half-truths. Her voice carried a mixture of frustration and desperation. "He doesn't understand. He's punishing me unfairly." Phones rose, neighbors craning to capture the scene. I didn't rush, didn't raise my voice. Calmly, I approached the steps, setting the ledger on the railing. "I'm not here to argue," I said, voice steady. "I'm here to clarify facts." I opened the ledger, flipping to the verified pages. Accounts frozen, loans unauthorized, transfers unapproved. Every transaction documented, verified by the bank, notarized where necessary. I gestured once toward the crowd. "Witnesses are present. Proof is in writing. My role is accounted for. Yours is not." The crowd went silent. Phones were lowered. Emily's expression shifted, panic flashing as she realized that the narrative she had tried to control was unraveling publicly. Her attempts at emotional manipulation had no power against documented truth. I made sure to capture witnesses immediately. Mrs. Cranston, the diner regulars, even the mail carrier who had noticed unusual deliveries, all willing to provide statements if necessary. I logged names, phone numbers, and addresses in a small notebook, noting their observations of Emily's repeated missteps and unauthorized actions. Every witness added weight, a web of corroboration that no rumor could disrupt. Later that day, the motel and home surveillance footage I had secured were reviewed by a local police detective. Though calm, I handed over the copies with precise notes, timestamps, room numbers, and descriptions of interactions. The officer, impressed by the methodical detail, confirmed that a pattern of intimidation and repeated unauthorized actions existed. "This will hold in court," he said plainly. Next came the protective order. The courthouse clerk walked me through the process step by step. Distance 500 feet. Violation equals immediate arrest. Service method confirmed. I signed, stamped, and filed. Case number documented. All conditions clearly outlined. I left the office with the assurance that any further intrusion would be met with enforceable authority. During the afternoon, I learned that Emily had sought advice about adverse possession, claiming intent to occupy property she believed she had rights to. The law in our state requires continuous hostile possession for over 20 years, and taxes must be paid. My documentation, combined with precise records of property ownership, made her claim impossible. I filed a note with the clerk and confirmed the legal impossibility, sealing the matter. With financial circles closed, I contacted creditors and collectors once more. Every account corrected, updated, and verified. "I am the sole responsible party," I repeated calmly. Any further communication regarding Miss Emily Lawson should be directed to her. Names, reference IDs, and confirmation times recorded in the ledger. By early evening, the town had absorbed the shift. Conversation over coffee at the diner, along the porch of the hardware store, at church steps, all confirmed the truth. Emily's narrative had collapsed, replaced with verifiable facts. The crowd that had gathered earlier had dispersed, leaving Emily standing quietly, forced to confront reality without public support. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of rain across the square. I returned home, steps deliberate, ledger in hand. The porch was quiet, the old truck parked, the house steady around me. I reviewed every document once more, noting dates, times, names, and confirmations. The circle was closed. Accounts, witnesses, property rights, protective order, all consolidated, all enforceable. By nightfall, the last step was complete. Emily could no longer misrepresent, manipulate, or infringe. The protective order was in place, legal and binding. Financial accounts corrected. Creditor communication secured. Community perception. I stepped onto the porch, looking out at the street, feeling the weight of order settle. Haversfield's lamps glowed softly, reflecting off wet sidewalks, dust settling after a brief afternoon shower. Everything had a place. Every action had consequence, and every move I made had been lawful, procedural, and undeniable. With the order filed and the circle closed, the next move wasn't hers anymore. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, the aroma carrying through the quiet house. Ledger stacked neatly, case files closed, witnesses documented. The law, coupled with careful planning, had ensured accountability without chaos. Justice didn't need drama. It only needed clarity, procedure, and patience. Emily would learn that soon enough, not through shouting or confrontation, but through unassailable, undeniable fact. The morning light hit the edges of Haversfield with a crisp clarity, the kind that makes every detail visible. I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing my notes again. Creditors had all been contacted, accounts updated, and property records verified. Every phone call had been logged, every email confirmed. The chaos Emily had tried to sow was now contained, replaced by methodical order. I began the day with one final round of communications. Each call was precise, polite, and fact-driven. "Yes, I am confirming Miss Emily Lawson holds no account authority," I repeated to the bank, then to the credit card company, then the utility provider. Names, reference numbers, timestamps, each recorded in my ledger. My voice remained calm, rhythm steady, no anger, no emotion. Procedure replaced frustration. Later, the protective order was served. The deputy walked me through the process. 500 feet minimum, immediate arrest for violation, signed and notarized. Emily's previous attempts to cross boundaries now had consequences enforceable by law. Each step I took reinforced the barrier between manipulation and accountability. I watched her receive the notice, standing silently, recognizing for the first time the tangible limits of her actions. Rumors began to ripple through the town again, but they fell flat against documented truth. The car lot manager, who had overheard Emily's desperate explanations, confirmed details to neighbors: dates, financial missteps, unauthorized access. Even those who had once sympathized now understood the sequence of events. Facts meticulously logged outweighed gossip. By mid-afternoon, Emily's financial illusions began to crumble. Collectors and creditors arrived at her residence, not mine, confirming her lack of authority and severed access. I observed quietly from my porch, coffee in hand, feeling neither triumph nor glee, only the calm weight of resolution. Neighbors glanced up from chores and conversations, noting the accountability now visible in the real world. There was one final escalation attempt. Late in the day, Emily returned, perhaps hoping for a loophole or to appeal to sympathy. I didn't confront her. I documented her presence, noting the time, exact words muttered and witnessed by the motel manager across the street. Within the hour, police confirmed this violated the protective order. Another entry, another solid line of accountability. Every move she made now reinforced the structure I had built, not weakened it. I reviewed the ledger that evening. The entries thick with evidence, calls logged, documents filed, witnesses accounted for, legal boundaries reinforced. I traced every transaction, every unauthorized attempt, every manipulation, and every intrusion. What had once been a web of uncertainty now read like a blueprint of accountability. Silence and procedure had replaced conflict. Emily's collapse was complete, not through punishment or anger, but through the undeniable consequence of her own repeated mistakes. Fired from her position at the small firm she had leveraged for personal gain, financial accounts frozen or corrected, community respect eroded, the structures she relied on no longer existed. I observed from the porch, detached, noting the subtle expressions of neighbors, recognition of fairness, not vengeance. I poured a second cup of coffee and walked slowly through the house. The spaces were the same as before, the creak of the floorboards, the scent of old pine from the living room bookshelf, the hum of the refrigerator. Yet the energy had shifted. Everything was calm, contained, lawful. Even the air felt lighter. The tension dissolved into order. That evening I glanced out the window toward the street. Children played, neighbors exchanged quiet greetings, the town moving on. Emily's illusions of control had vanished, replaced by the tangible reality of lawful boundaries. I didn't need to gloat or intervene. Procedure and documentation had ensured accountability. I sat back on the porch reflecting. Justice had arrived quietly, methodically, and legally. No yelling, no public confrontation, no emotional chaos, only facts, witnesses, and enforceable boundaries. Every misstep of Emily's, every attempt to repeat past mistakes had been contained. Every intrusion met with law and careful observation. The final lines in my ledger captured it best. Every action has consequence. Every choice is accountable. Truth prevails when patience, clarity, and law are applied. I closed the book, the weight lifting from my shoulders. Justice didn't knock loud. It simply arrived, measured and undeniable. The town, the law, and the documented facts now carried the lesson Emily had ignored. Manipulation and repeated mistakes meet natural and lawful consequences. I leaned back, inhaling the evening air. Peace was not a victory of anger. It was the quiet result of diligence, integrity, and unshakable calm. By nightfall, Haversfield slept under a clear sky. The house stood firm, the streets calm, and the ledger rested on the table, a silent testament that procedure, patience, and lawful action had restored order. And I, sitting on my porch, knew that no repeated misstep, no emotional appeal, and no attempt at manipulation could unseat the structure I had built. The diner smelled of coffee and toast, the jukebox humming a soft country tune in the background. I slid into a corner booth, ledger closed beside me, waiting. The sun fell low over Haversfield, casting long shadows across the brick sidewalks outside. I had called Emily earlier, simply, "We need to meet. Today, noon, diner." She arrived 10 minutes late, hands twisting in her lap, eyes avoiding mine. Her hair had lost some luster. Her posture carried the tension of months spent under quiet consequences. She slid into the booth opposite me, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Dad, she began, voice uncertain, trailing off. I didn't interrupt. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth and smell anchor my focus. The ledger sat between us like a silent witness. Finally, I spoke. Emily, everything you've done, everything you tried to manipulate, it's documented. The accounts, the orders, the protective measures, and all verified. You have a choice now. Her eyes flicked to the ledger. I could see the panic mixed with regret rising in her chest. I didn't realize, she stammered. You didn't realize, I repeated softly, because you thought history didn't apply to you. But it does. You repeated my mistakes. Financial shortcuts, manipulations, reliance on borrowed trust, and thought you'd escape consequence. You won't. But you can choose to face it honestly or continue under delusion. She swallowed, finally meeting my gaze. I know I messed up. I thought I could handle it better than you did. Her voice cracked, a mixture of shame and fear. I leaned back, calm. Handling it better doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It means acknowledging truth, taking measured steps, and accepting boundaries. I tapped the ledger lightly. This is your chance. You can set it right. Publicly, privately, whatever it takes. But no shortcuts. No manipulation. No excuses. Her hand shook, and for a moment I saw the girl she had once been, one curious, stubborn, full of life. But I didn't soften. Love alone isn't protection from consequence. Your inheritance, both financial and personal, is no longer tied to your missteps. You're accountable, not entitled. Any attempt to reclaim what was lost without honesty will fail. You understand? Yes, Dad, she whispered. Tears brimmed, but her shoulders squared slightly, as if for the first time she realized what integrity actually required. I'll do whatever it takes, I nodded once. Good, that's all I ask. Truth over comfort. Accountability over entitlement. You can make amends, no. Not to regain favor, but to honor what was always ours to protect. Trust and dignity. We sat in silence for several minutes. The only sound, the low hum of the jukebox and the occasional clink of dishes. Outside, the sun sank behind the town hall, shadows stretching long and deliberate. I could feel the weight of months lift slightly, knowing the lesson had landed. Not through anger, but clarity and law. Finally, she stood. Thank you, she said, voice steadier. I'll start. With the statements, the corrections, everything. I smiled softly, not warm, not triumphant, but measured. Then start. One step at a time. She left the booth, leaving the diner quieter than it had been in weeks. I watched her walk toward the street, shoulders tighter but resolute. The ledger stayed beside me, a testament to order over chaos, facts over emotion. The town would witness accountability not through spectacle, but through the steady unfolding of documented truth. I picked up my coffee, letting the steam rise slowly, feeling the calm of a father who had acted not in rage, but with patience, law, and reason. The lesson was delivered. The consequence was clear. The choice finally belonged to her. Outside, the street lamps flickered on, illuminating the wet pavement where shadows stretched long. The jukebox hummed its final notes for the hour. I took a final sip of coffee, set the cup down, and let the weight of quiet closure settle. Some debts are repaid in truth, not money. Some lessons come not from yelling, but from measured consequence. And sometimes the only way to protect love is to enforce boundaries with unwavering calm. I watched Emily disappear down the street, the evening breeze catching her hair. The diner door closed softly behind her, and I knew, for the first time in months, that accountability had a shape, and it had walked past me willingly. The house would remain ours, unchanged, steady, a monument not to victory but to endurance, law, and dignity. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of light that gilds the edges of Haversfield and makes every detail sharp. I sipped coffee on the porch, the old house settling around me with familiar creaks. The quiet was almost sacred, a prelude to the day that would mark accountability in ways neither Emily nor I could ignore. The church hall filled slowly, neighbors and townspeople trickling in, offering nods and quiet greetings. Emily arrived last, her shoulders squared, hands folded in front of her, eyes wary but determined. I watched from the back, maintaining distance, letting her step fully into the role of responsibility. When the pastor asked for her words, she hesitated briefly, then spoke. I need to share the truth about choices I've made and mistakes I repeated. My father, he showed me what accountability means. Not through yelling, not through shame, but through clarity and law. Her voice strengthened with each sentence. She outlined the financial corrections, the missteps she'd attempted, the steps she would now take to repair them. The congregation listened, silent, the weight of documented truth heavier than any rumor ever could be. She shared the ledger entries, the account verifications, and the protective measures in place. Numbers, dates, and actions replaced drama with reality. I noticed nods in the pews, murmured acknowledgement, and a quiet respect settling over the room. The community understood the lesson wasn't just for her, it was for all of us who had watched. After her statement, the pastor stepped forward. What's been revealed here today is more than family conflict. It is a lesson in integrity, patience, and responsibility. One person acted with calm diligence to restore order, and another chose to accept accountability. That's a legacy worth honoring. Emily left the podium with relief in her posture, approaching me quietly afterward. "Dad, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I see now the weight of what I tried to avoid. I want to make amends, not just words, but actions." I nodded, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. Actions speak louder than words. Begin there. Not for me, not for the town, but for yourself. Over the next few weeks, the house saw subtle changes. I restored some rooms to new use, one for community gatherings, another as a quiet reading space. Emily worked diligently, volunteering at the town hall, assisting with local bookkeeping and maintaining transparency in all her affairs. The property and legacy, once potential tools of entitlement, were now instruments of service and clarity. The air around the house changed. Morning light slanted through the windows onto polished wood. Birds sang from the trees, and the scent of fresh bread from neighbors' kitchens mingled with the pine in the living room. The town moved naturally, no longer colored by whispered uncertainty. Trust, once shaken, began to rebuild organically. One morning, Emily approached with a small envelope. Inside were statements she had corrected, letters of acknowledgement sent to creditors, and a short note. "I am learning and I will not forget. Thank you for letting me start again." I smiled quietly, folding the note and placing it in a drawer with the ledger. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just proof that lessons, when enforced with patience and law, can take root. Days later, I took my usual walk to the lakeshore behind the house. The water lay still, reflecting the morning light. Children from the neighborhood played nearby, their laughter carrying across the calm surface. I paused, watching, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of life continue. Justice had not arrived through anger or spectacle. It had arrived quietly, methodically, lawfully. Back at the house, I brewed coffee and sat on the porch, the ledger resting beside me. Sunlight glinted off the windows, warming the boards beneath my hands. I thought about the months of manipulation, the betrayals repeated, and the diligence required to restore balance. And I understood something fundamental. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from letting structure, truth, and patience do their work. Emily knocked gently at the door, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "For you," she said. "I know it's been a long road." I accepted the cup with a small smile, nodding. "It has, but the road's end isn't about punishment. It's about clarity." We sat in silence for a moment, watching sunlight spill across the lawn. The town hummed quietly beyond the fence. Children laughing, neighbors chatting, life moving forward. No words were needed. Trust had been rebuilt, boundaries respected, and the legacy of patience and accountability firmly in place. I reflected on what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. The house, the land, the documents, they were more than property. They were symbols of law, dignity, and endurance. Every creak of the floorboards, every beam of sunlight through the curtains reminded me that peace was not fragile. It was grounded in clarity, patience, and integrity. Emily finally spoke again. "I'll keep learning," she said softly. "I promise not to repeat the mistakes." I nodded, letting the words settle between us. The sun warmed the porch. Birds moved from tree to tree, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and early morning dew. All around us, the world moved forward, not perfect, but steady, honest, and quiet. I took a slow sip of coffee, closing my eyes for a moment. The house, the town, the lessons, and the legacy all aligned in their own quiet way. Peace wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It came softly, like sunlight over still water. like the turning of pages in a ledger meticulously kept, like a daughter finally understanding the cost of repeated mistakes and the value of accountability. The day stretched before us, ordinary, calm, and full of possibility. And I knew, without needing to say it aloud, that the story had finally found its quiet, enduring home. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering without pain. Peace didn't come from winning, it came from letting go. The truth finally had a home, and it wasn't mine anymore. I sat back, watching sunlight play across the porch boards, listening to the soft murmur of life continuing around me. And for the first time in years, the weight of betrayal had been lifted, replaced by calm, lawful restoration and the quiet strength of enduring legacy. Weeks passed with the rhythm of ordinary life. Hiversfield breathed its usual morning fog and sunlit afternoons, children running across the lawns, neighbors greeting one another at the corner store. I spent my mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, ledger tucked safely in the drawer, a quiet sentinel over the life we had reclaimed. Then came the message. Emily had sent a short text. "I'd like to earn your trust back. I'm doing everything I promised. Can we talk?" I smiled softly, leaning back in the chair. No fanfare, no dramatic reply, just a small nod to the effort, the intention. "Yes," I typed back. Simple, measured, a recognition that change is quiet, not flashy. Over the following days, she showed the proof of her work. Letters sent to creditors, corrected statements, public acknowledgments at town hall, and careful volunteering in the community. Each action was visible, accountable, verifiable, the opposite of entitlement and manipulation. For the first time, I saw her taking ownership not because she had to, but because she had chosen to. One morning, I walked down to the lake behind the house, the same path I had taken months ago when betrayal first cut deep. The water lay calm, the early sun reflecting gold across its surface. Birds called to one another, swooping low and rising again. Children's laughter echoed from a distant dock. I paused, taking it all in, noticing how the patterns of life persisted, gentle and predictable despite the storms that had passed. It struck me then how different generosity and enabling truly are. Giving without boundaries leads to repetition of mistakes. Love without structure breeds entitlement. But patience, clarity, and lawful action create stability. I had learned it, Emily had learned it, and Haversfield, in its quiet, everyday way, had learned it too. Emily approached, her steps cautious but confident. She held 2 mugs of coffee, the steam curling lazily in the morning light. "For you," she said, placing one on the railing. I accepted it, nodding. "I can see the difference," I said. "Not everything is fixed. Not everything will be perfect. But it's real now. That's what counts." We stood for a long moment, watching sunlight filter through the trees, wind shifting leaves gently, water shimmering in the distance. The house behind us, our old home, stood steady and unchanged, a monument to endurance, law, and dignity. I felt a weight lift fully this time. Justice had not come with anger or loud confrontation. It had arrived quietly, through documentation, patience, and the enforcement of truth. The lessons had been absorbed, the legacy secured. She spoke softly again, almost a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up." I shook my head gently. "I didn't save you from consequences. I just made sure they taught something." Silence stretched, comfortable and full of understanding. Birds darted above the lake, children's laughter carried on the breeze, and sunlight reflected off the water like a quiet affirmation. I finally turned toward the house, taking a slow sip of coffee, feeling the warmth settle through me. Every detail, the porch boards, the sunlight, the trees swaying, the ledger tucked safely away, spoke of patience, lawfulness, and moral clarity. Peace had arrived not through shouting, not through revenge, but through methodical action and quiet oversight. I sat back, watching Emily move through the yard, knowing she had learned the hardest lesson without needing my voice to enforce it. Some debts are repaid in truth, not money. Some lessons come not from fury, but from measured consequence. And sometimes the only way to protect love is to enforce boundaries with unwavering calm. The sun climbed higher, warming the porch. The birds called again. The water rippled. Children ran across the lawn, and I exhaled slowly, letting it all sink in. It had been worth the wait. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.